This player right here, tight end Ben Sinnott, was apparently the player that the 49ers wanted to target in the second round. Obviously, as we know, they landed with Renardo Green, but the plot thickens with this new report from Eric Branch of the SF Chronicle. Now, if you weren't familiar with Ben Sinnott, he was probably the most complete tight end in this draft as a blocker, pass catcher, athletic traits, physical profile. He was a phenomenal tight end coming out of Kansas State. We talked about him on this channel as a guy that we mocked to the San Francisco 49ers multiple times, thinking that they were in the business for a legitimate tight end two, and who knows, potential George Kittle replacement. Now, as we know, the San Francisco 49ers just signed a tight end yesterday. They went out and got Logan Thomas. Now, Logan Thomas is 32 years old. He's about to be 33. He's a journeyman in this league. He's started the last 4 years with Washington, and he's done pretty darn well for himself, carving out a role as a former quarterback who transitioned to being a tight end, and a pretty solid tight end at that. And he became a leader on the Commanders and all those different types of things. But let's take a little bit deeper dive into the situation where, hey, 49ers got sniped by one of their own. And I really am curious about this whole situation and the way it played out. So this is a little snippet from the article. It says the lack of production behind Kittle, who's 30, is why the 49ers closely studied the position in this year's draft class and likely would have used their second round pick, number 64 overall, on Kansas State tight end Ben Sinnott if he had been available. Well, it would have been great to have a well-rounded tight end to come in and back up George Kittle because, as we know, the San Francisco 49ers tried to get the tight end Brock Wright from the Detroit Lions by extending an offer sheet to him in which the Detroit Lions ultimately matched. So we thought we had a new tight end for about 5 minutes, and then the Detroit Lions were like, no, we're going to keep him. So they paid him, and then obviously they landed on a guy named Logan Thomas, who we already talked about. But when you look at this a little bit further, the Commanders and first-year general manager Adam Peters, a longtime 49ers executive, selected Sinnott with pick 53. The 49ers used their second round pick on Florida State cornerback Renardo Green. Adam Peters. I can, and just so like we can kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into the scouting process and, from the knowledge that I have about the timelines and how everything works. Obviously, Adam Peters was hired after the season ended, but I think it's very important to understand that the scouts start their work very early in this process and are obviously working all the way throughout the college season. And so they're able to report back and give feedback on which players they like. So there is got to be a working knowledge that Adam Peters knew that one, the 49ers wanted to get a tight end, and two, that this is the type of tight end they would like to get. Because I mean, come on, Adam Peters was like the first hire that John Lynch had ever made, and he had been with the 49ers for so long as the assistant general manager and as a guy who was really just felt like he was the point person when it came to scouting and personnel and all those different types of things, right below John Lynch. So you got to know Adam Peters was scouting Sinnott with the San Francisco 49ers. See, that's the tough part about it. It's because obviously he's the one doing a lot of the information gathering and then presenting these kinds of things to John and Kyle to then better make the decisions, present this information to the coaching staff so that they can huddle around it and start to discern who they want to draft. But when that guy goes and gets hired by another team, they can do this. They can snipe you. And this is exactly what happened. Now, the 49ers did get Florida State cornerback Renardo Green. And I think some people like called it one of the biggest reaches in the draft. And I thought that was an interesting way to describe the pick because heading into this draft, I thought Renardo Green was one of the best prospects that no one was talking about. He just was not covered by the media. No one talked about Renardo Green, his press man ability, the way he locked down some of the like first round wide receivers. Um, he's just a very physical, very active cornerback, and he just didn't get a lot of love throughout this process. But he was a guy that had been on my radar for actually a couple years before I even entered the draft. So when it came time, I was a big fan of Renardo, so I don't perceive it as a reach. And early reports out of OTAs seem to indicate that Renardo Green might be looking like one of the early best players out of the rookie class. But obviously, that remains to be seen, and to get pads on all that good stuff. But the butterfly effect of these types of things of getting sniped. I heard another story about how the San Francisco 49ers were targeting Gerald Everett um, in the draft. I think that was a 2017 draft. The Chargers ended up drafting him. Do you know who the 49ers ended up taking? They ended up taking George Kittle in the fifth round. So getting sniped sometimes can be a blessing in disguise. So although it might be like, oh man, that would have been so cool to have a first round wide receiver and a second round tight end who could absolutely develop into that same role that George Kittle plays. I mean, they've almost identical measurables. They're both 6'4", 250 pounds. And obviously the fit would be fantastic because he can block and he can catch. He's an all-around tight end like George Kittle. And so that would be great. But if we look back in a couple years from now and we're like, dude, Renardo Green is a starting cornerback for us and he is playing phenomenally well, we might look back at this and be like, man, it actually might benefit the 49ers more to have a starting cornerback in which they drafted opposed to having a starting tight end in which they drafted. Now, obviously, we have to wait about 2 to 3 years before we can fully judge this entire situation. But I love these types of stories that come out about the draft. And I love that Adam Peters was the one who seemingly sniped the San Francisco 49ers from getting the tight end that they ultimately wanted. But in the end, it could actually work out for the better. Now, the 49ers didn't draft a tight end at all. They brought in Mason Pline through undrafted free agency. And of course, we talked about the free agent they just signed yesterday. So they will probably have to push the eventual, successor of George Kittle another year if they do plan to draft him in another tight end in one of the upcoming drafts, maybe next year. So we'll see how that all plays out, but this will be a fascinating thing to come back to in about 2 to 3 years. Who's better, Ben Sinnott or Renardo Green? I think Renardo Green is a quality player, and I do think Ben Sinnott is a quality player. So I think it's up for grabs to see who will come away with that title. But that's definitely something that I'm going to revisit in a couple years from now. Let me know what you guys think about this situation. Getting sniped by Adam Peters in the NFL draft happens to the best of us. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more updates.